Everybody thinks a banker's job is to protect the bank's money from the people. For 30 years, I did the exact opposite. My job, the way I understood it, was to protect the people from a bank that had forgotten they were people. And for most of those 30 years, I was the best in that building at it. The one who knew which loan a computer had wrongly turned down. The one whose customers paid back what they borrowed at a rate that should have made me a legend. And then a young woman arrived with a laptop and a head full of formulas. And she decided that a spreadsheet she had never met my neighborhood knew my people better than I did, after knowing them my whole life. I want to tell you how a downturn, of all things, finally proved which one of us was right. My name is Pearl Dabney. I am 57 years old, and for over 30 years I have been a banker in North Tulsa, Oklahoma. Which means I have been the woman who decides whether a dream gets the money it needs or gets sent home empty. I was a loan officer, and then I ran the branch. And in all that time, I became something that does not show up on any organizational chart. I became the person this whole community trusted with the most private thing there is, which is not your secrets. It is your money and your hope and the gap between what you have and what you are trying to build. People would sit down across my desk and tell me things they had not told their own pastor, and I never once forgot what an honor that was. You have to understand who sat in my chairs. The woman who had cleaned other folks' houses for 40 years and wanted just once before she died to own the little house she lived in. The barber who had cut 3 generations of heads and wanted to buy his own shop instead of renting the chair. The church that needed a roof. The young couple, scared, holding hands, who had been turned down twice already and did not really believe a bank would ever say yes to people like them. These were not risks to be managed. These were the whole reason I got up in the morning. The downtown branches chased the big accounts, the developers, the people who already had everything. I had the honor of being the banker for the people who had nothing but their word. And I will tell you a secret the downtown branches never learned. A person who has nothing but their word will guard that word with their life. It is the comfortable who will stiff you, because to them it is only ever business. To my people, paying me back was a matter of pride, of name, of dignity. And dignity, it turns out, pays better than collateral ever could. Before I go on, let me say something to a particular person listening to me tonight. If you have ever had years of hard-won wisdom, the kind you can only get from doing a thing well for a long time, waved away by somebody with a degree and a formula and no experience at all, somebody who was so sure their system knew better than your knowing, tell me about it in the comments. Tell me what they could not see that you could. Because I have a feeling this room is going to fill up tonight with people whose deep, real, human expertise got treated like it was nothing. And I want every one of you in here with me. Now, you cannot understand why I bank the way I bank until you understand where I am from. I am from Greenwood. My people are from Greenwood. If you do not know that name, let me teach it to you, because every soul should know it. Greenwood was a neighborhood right here in Tulsa that, 100 years ago, was the wealthiest Black community in all of America. They called it Black Wall Street. Black folks, locked out of the white economy, had built their own, a whole thriving world of Black-owned banks and shops and theaters and doctors' offices, where a Black dollar circulated for months inside the community before it ever left, building wealth, building pride, building a future. And in the year 1921, a white mob burned it to the ground, burned 35 city blocks, murdered hundreds of people, destroyed in 2 days what it had taken a generation of brilliant, determined Black people to build. And the insurance companies refused every claim, and the government did not lift a finger. And the survivors were left with ash. I need you to sit with that for a moment, because the history books rush right past it. These were not poor people the mob destroyed. These were black doctors and lawyers and bankers and shop owners, people who had done every single thing this country tells you that you are supposed to do, worked and saved and built and excelled. And they were burned out precisely because they had succeeded. Their success was the crime. A prosperous black community was a thing that a certain kind of man in 1921 could not allow to exist. And so they erased it. And then they wrote it out of the school books so completely that I was a grown woman before I learned the full truth of what had happened in my own city, to my own blood. That silence was its own second crime. They burned it down, and then they made the whole country forget it had ever been beautiful. My grandmother lived through it. Her name was Pearl, and I am named for her. She was a girl when the mob came, and she watched her father's store burn, and she never, until the day she died, spoke of the things she saw on those 2 days. But she taught me the thing that came after, which is the part the history books forget to dwell on. They rebuilt it, with no insurance, no government, no help, no apology. Those same people picked through the ashes and they built Greenwood back, store by store, brick by brick, because they understood something the mob could never burn out of them, which is that the will to build is the one thing nobody can take from you. My grandfather Asa rebuilt his store with his own hands, and on the counter of that new store he kept, in a little dish by the register, the very first silver dollar that new store ever took in. He kept it his whole life. He gave it to me before he passed, and he said, "Pearl, they can burn everything you have got. But as long as you have got the will to start again, you have got everything." I keep that silver dollar in my desk drawer at the bank to this day. It has been with me for every single loan I ever made. My grandfather Asa was not a sentimental man. He was a hard man, made hard by what he had lived through, and he did not give speeches. So when he put that silver dollar in my hand, an old woman now, telling you about a girl's hand, he did not say much. He said, "You are going into the money business, Pearl. Then you remember what money is for. Money is not for hoarding, and it is not for lording over people. Money is a seed. A seed is no good sitting in a jar. A seed is only worth something when you put it in the ground and trust it to grow. Your whole job," he told me, "is to find the good ground and plant the seed and have the patience to wait for it. That is the whole of banking," he said, "and the men downtown have forgotten it because they are so terrified of losing a single seed that they let the entire field go to weeds." I was 22 years old. I have spent 35 years proving that hard old man right. So when I sit across from a young couple, or a woman trying to open a hair shop, or a man who wants to buy the building he has rented for 20 years, I am not just looking at a credit score. I am looking at the great-grandchildren of Greenwood. I am looking at people who come from folks who built empires out of ash and got them burned down and built them again. And I know something a computer will never know. I know that a credit score tells you a person's past, and it cannot tell you one single thing about their character. It cannot see the woman who fell behind on a bill because she buried her husband, but who has never broken a promise in her life. It cannot see the young man whose thin credit file just means nobody ever gave him a chance. Not that he would waste one. The number tells you where a person has been. Only a human being who takes the time to know them can tell you where they are going. And telling where people are going, that was my gift. That was the whole job. Let me give you one example, 1 out of 1,000. A woman came to me years ago wanting $6,000 to buy the equipment to start cleaning offices at night. Her credit was wrecked, truly wrecked, and the formula, if we had had the formula back then, would have laughed her right out of the building. But I did not look at the wreckage. I asked her how it happened, and she told me, Plain, no excuses, that she had run up credit cards to keep her children fed during a stretch when their father left and the work dried up. She had gone into debt to feed her babies. Now you tell me, what does a low credit score mean on a woman like that? To the machine, it means high risk. To me, it meant the highest character I had seen all week. It meant a woman who would walk through fire for an obligation, because she had already walked through fire for the only obligation that ever truly mattered. I gave her the $6,000. She paid back every dime early. And she cleaned offices until she owned the company that cleaned the offices. And she employs 40 people now. The formula would have seen a deadbeat. I saw a queen who had hit a hard patch. That is the difference. That is the entire difference. And it is worth more than every algorithm ever written. For 30 years, I made loans that the formulas would have rejected. Loans to people the system had written off. And do you know what my secret was? My people paid me back. They paid me back at a rate that the fancy downtown branches could only dream of. Because I did not lend to numbers. I lent to character. And character, it turns out, is the best collateral there ever was. A man whose whole community knows you gave him his first chance does not default on you. He would sooner sell his own car. I knew that. I had 30 years of proof of that sitting in my files. And then they sent us Meredith Brock. Meredith Brock was maybe 45, sharp, polished, brought in from corporate to be our new regional executive when the big national bank bought us out. And Meredith believed in the algorithm the way my grandmother believed in the Lord. To her, the new automated lending system was not a tool. It was the truth. It was objective. It was fair, she would say, because it was blind. It did not see race. It just saw risk. And I tried. I really did try to explain to that woman what her blind, fair, objective system could not see. I told her that a system trained on decades of who got loans before would simply learn to keep saying no to the same neighborhoods that had always been told no, that you can build the redlining right into the math and call it science. She looked at me like I was a sweet old relic who did not understand technology. She said, "Pearl, with respect, the data does not lie." And I wanted to say, "Child, the data does not lie, but it only knows what it was taught." And it was taught by a world that has been lying about my people for 100 years. I tried to give her a history lesson once, because I thought maybe she just did not know. I told her about the old maps, the ones from the 1930s, where government men had literally drawn red lines around the black neighborhoods and marked them hazardous, so that no bank would lend a dime inside them, for generations. I told her that those red lines were the reason the wealth gap looks the way it looks today, that you cannot lock a whole people out of credit for 50 years and then point at their thin credit files as though the thinness were their own doing. And I told her that her shiny new system, trained on all those decades of who got approved and who got denied, had simply learned the shape of those old red lines and drawn them again, invisibly, in code, where nobody could see them and call them what they were. I told her, your algorithm is a redlining map in a lab coat. And Meredith Brock heard none of it. She nodded politely, the way you nod at an old person telling a long story. And she went right back to her dashboard. Because the most dangerous prejudice of all is the kind that has convinced itself it is nothing but pure mathematics. She started overriding me. A loan would come across my desk, somebody I knew, somebody I had watched grow up, somebody I knew in my bones was good for it. And the system would flag it, and I would approve it anyway with my override, the way I had for 30 years. And Meredith would reverse my override. She took my discretion away, a piece at a time. And I want to tell you what that does to a person. To be overridden day after day. It is not just the loans. It is the message underneath, delivered fresh every morning, that 30 years of your judgment, your knowing, your faithful service is worth less than a line of code written by somebody who has never once set foot in your neighborhood. Every reversed override was a little note that said, "We do not trust you. We never really did. You were only ever holding the chair until the machine was ready." I had trained half the loan officers in that region, and I had to sit in those meetings and be talked to like a child who did not understand the modern world, and smile and not let them see it land, because a black woman who shows that it landed gets called difficult, and difficult is the last thing they let you be before they let you go. I watched it happen to Mr. Purvis, who had cut hair on the same corner for 35 years and wanted to buy his building before the landlord sold it out from under him. The man had paid rent on that spot, on time, for 35 years, which is to say he had proven 360 separate times that he pays what he owes when he owes it. But Mr. Purvis had never carried a credit card in his life, paid cash for everything the way his mama taught him. And so to the machine, he was a ghost, a man with no history, and it said no. I had to sit across from a man I had known my whole life and tell him a computer had decided his 35 years of paying rent meant nothing. I have done a lot of hard things in this career. That one I still carry. She told me my approval rates were out of line with the model, that my way of doing things was unscalable, sentimental, a liability. She did not call me a bad banker. She called me obsolete. And she did it pleasantly, in meetings, with charts, while the people in my chairs, my people, the children of Greenwood, got turned away by a computer, one after another, sent home empty, told no by a machine that had decided, without ever meeting them, that they were a risk. And I am going to tell you the truth about the lowest moment, because somebody needs to hear it. There came a day when they put it to me plain. Meredith and the people above her offered me a package to retire early. Take the money, Pearl. Step aside gracefully. Let the new system do its work. And I was tired. I was 57, and I had been fighting this fight by myself. And I will confess to you that I sat at my desk with that retirement offer in my hand, and I thought, maybe it is time. Maybe the world has moved on, and I am just an old woman holding on to an old way. And right then, while I was sitting there ready to give up, a young man came and sat down across my desk. His name was Darnell, and he had a business plan for a little trucking company, one truck to start, and a thin credit file because he was young and had done everything right and just never been given a chance. And I ran him through the new system, because I had to now, and the system said no. The machine looked at that hard-working, honest, hungry young man, and it said no. The way it had said no to his daddy and his granddaddy and everybody back to the ash of Greenwood. And something rose up in me, sitting there between that retirement check and that young man's hopeful, careful face. Because I knew Darnell. I had watched him grow up 3 pews behind me at church. I knew he had been getting up at 4 a.m. to drive somebody else's truck for years, saving, planning, doing every single thing right, asking nobody for anything. The only thing thin about Darnell was his credit file, and the only reason it was thin was that the world had never once extended him a hand to build it with. The machine called that risk. I knew it was just youth, and youth that has been denied is not the same thing as danger. And I thought about all the Darnells I had said yes to across 30 years, and how every last one of them had paid me back. And I thought, if I take this check and walk out of here today, the next Darnell sits down across from a machine that says no. And there will be nobody left in this building who knows the difference between a risk and a young man nobody ever gave a chance. And I looked at Darnell's face, and then I opened my desk drawer, and I looked at my grandfather's silver dollar sitting there, the first dollar of a store he built twice, and I heard him say it, as long as you have got the will to start again. And I closed that drawer, and I tore up that retirement offer, and I made up my mind that they were going to have to drag me out of that bank because somebody in that building had to keep being a human being, and it was going to be me. I found a way to get Darnell his loan. I want you to remember Darnell. And then, about a year later, the economy did what the economy always eventually does. It turned. A downturn came, the kind that comes for everybody, and people all over the country started losing jobs, and loans all over the country started going bad. And up in the regional office, Meredith Brock watched her beautiful, objective, scientific portfolio start to default. The loans her perfect algorithm had approved, the safe ones, the ones with the high scores, they began to go under in waves. Because it turns out, a high credit score on a man who has no loyalty to anybody will not stop him from walking away from a house when the value drops. The numbers Meredith trusted started to crumble. And I want you to understand why, because this is the whole secret of everything I know. A credit score measures whether a person has had money. It does not measure what a person will do when money gets hard. And those are completely different questions. The man with the high score, the safe bet, the one the algorithm loved, a great many of those men had never been truly tested a day in their lives. And when the hard times came and their house was suddenly worth less than they owed on it, a good number of them just did the cold math and walked away, mailed the keys back to the bank, because to them, it had only ever been a transaction. But my people had been tested their whole lives. Hard times were not a surprise to them. Hard times were Tuesday. And when you have already survived everything, and somebody finally treats you with dignity and bets on you, you do not walk away from that person the first time it gets cold. You hold on. You pay in nickels and dimes before you will let that person down. The algorithm had quietly optimized for people who had never suffered. I had been lending, all along, to people who knew exactly how to survive, which made them, in the only season that ever truly tests a loan, the safest bet in the entire bank. And then, somebody up at corporate ran the report that changed everything. They broke down the loan performance branch by branch, looking for who was bleeding the worst, so they could decide what to cut. And they found, sitting there at the bottom of the list, in the best position of any branch in the entire region, the little North Tulsa branch run by the obsolete old woman they had tried to retire. My loans were not defaulting. In the worst downturn in years, my book, my risky, sentimental, unscalable, override it Pearl book, was the strongest in the whole region. Darnell was still paying, every month, on time. I called him once, during the worst of it, just to check, because I worry about my people the way you worry about your own children. And Darnell, who by then had 2 trucks and was thinking about a third, he laughed at me, gently. And he said, "Miss Pearl, you do not ever have to worry about me. You were the only one who said yes when everybody else said no. I would close this whole business down and go back to driving nights before I would ever let you down." Do you hear what that young man told me? That is not in any formula. There is no column on any spreadsheet for the loyalty of a person you treated like a human being back when the world was treating him like a number. That loyalty was my whole portfolio. That loyalty is the reason my book was the strongest in the region. You cannot buy it, and you cannot code it. And Meredith Brock's machine could not so much as see it. And it was the single most valuable asset that bank ever had. So was the hair shop, and the man who finally bought his building, and the young couple in their first house, because I had not lent them money. I had lent them respect, the first anybody had ever extended them. And you do not default on the one person who believed in you. You pay that person back if you have to do it in nickels. They could not argue with it, because it was in the one language they had told me was the only language that counted: numbers. My numbers were the best in the region, and they had been the best, quietly, for 30 years. And the only reason nobody had noticed was that nobody had ever bothered to ask the old black woman in North Tulsa how she did it. I found out the way you find out about most things in a big company, by accident, in a meeting. They had put the branch rankings up on a big screen, expecting to use them to justify closing the weakest ones. And there, at the very top of the column, the strongest performing book in the entire region, all the way through the worst of the downturn, was my little branch, the one they had been 6 months from shutting down. I watched the people in that room squint at it, certain it had to be an error in the data. They actually stopped the meeting to check the spreadsheet for a mistake, because it could not be, in their whole understanding of the world, that the obsolete woman and her sentimental little loans had outperformed every algorithm-run branch they had. But there was no mistake. The mistake had been theirs for 30 years, and now it was up on a screen, in numbers too big to argue with. Meredith Brock came to my branch herself, and I will give her credit, because she did not have to. She sat down across my desk, in the chair where Darnell had sat, and she was quiet for a moment. And then she said, "Pearl, I owe you an apology. The model could not see what you saw. I would like to understand how you do it." She did not grovel. She was not a groveling kind of woman, and I did not need her to be. She just told the truth, which is the most you can ask of anybody, that her science had been blind in exactly the place I had warned her it was blind, and that the thing she had called obsolete had quietly been the most accurate risk assessment in the entire company the whole time. I poured that woman a cup of coffee, and I told her some of what I have told you. I told her about the red lines on the old maps. I told her that her algorithm was not evil, it was just obedient, that it had faithfully learned 100 years of injustice, and then handed it back to her, dressed up as data. And I watched something change in her face, because Meredith Brock was not a bad person. She was a person who had mistaken a mirror for a window, who had thought she was looking out at the world when she was only ever looking at a reflection of its oldest prejudices, polished up in math. And to her credit, once she had seen it, she could not unsee it. The numbers had cracked her certainty open, and into that crack, finally, a little bit of truth could get in. That is the only way some people ever change at all. On the day the very thing they worshipped turns around and proves them wrong in its own language. And here is what I did with that moment, because this is the part that matters. I did not gloat, and I did not take a victory and go home. I told Meredith that if she really wanted to understand, then she could help me build it into the system instead of out of it. I told her the bank could keep its algorithm, but that every branch in a community like mine needed a human being with the authority to override it. A person who knew the neighborhood, who could see the character a number could not, who could say yes to the next Darnell. I did not want her job. I did not want her money. I wanted them to stop saying no to my people by machine. And because I now had 30 years of numbers behind me that nobody could argue with, they listened. They made my way the official policy of the region. They called it relationship lending and put it in a fancy memo and acted like they had invented it. I did not care what they called it. I had spent my whole life fighting a no, and I had finally, with a downturn and a silver dollar and one young man with a truck, turned it into a yes for everybody who came after. But the moment I will keep, the one I will carry with me, did not happen in any boardroom. Word had gotten around the neighborhood that they had tried to retire me, that the bank had been thinking of closing my branch. And the week the news went the other way, the week it came out that my branch had been saved and my way had won, my little lobby filled up. Darnell came, and Mr. Purvis, and the woman with the cleaning company that employs 40 people, and the young couple from their first house with a new baby now, and a dozen others. People I had said yes to across 30 years. They did not say much. They just came and stood in the lobby of the bank that had nearly let me go, so that the suits would see them, would see the faces behind the numbers, would understand that a branch is not a spreadsheet. It is a covenant between a banker and the people who trusted her with their hope. I stood behind my desk and looked out at all of those faces. All those yeses come back around to say thank you. And I will be honest with you, I had to go in the back room for a minute. Even a banker cries sometimes. So let me leave you with this. Every one of you whose hard, real, human knowing has been waved away by somebody with a formula, they are going to tell you that their system is objective, that their data is neutral, that their way is the future and your way is the past. And some of them will even believe it, the way Meredith believed it, with no malice at all. But you remember this: a formula only knows what it was taught, and the world that taught it was not fair. And so the formula is not fair either, no matter how clean and scientific they dress it up. The thing you know, the thing you learned by sitting across from real human beings year after year and paying attention, that is not obsolete. That is the rarest and most valuable knowledge there is. And the proof of it will come. Maybe not when you want it, but it will come. Usually on the day the system they trusted falls apart and yours is still standing. So you hold on to your knowing. You keep saying yes to the ones the machine wrote off. And you wait for the numbers to catch up to what your heart already knew. I am Pearl Dabney. A computer told my whole community they were not worth the risk. And an old woman from Greenwood proved, in the only language that bank understood, that they were the safest bet it ever made. I still have my grandfather's silver dollar in my desk drawer. They burned his store down, and he built it back. And they tried to write his great-grandchildren off with a machine. And we are still here, still building, still paying our debts, still rising out of the ash. That is who we have always been. If your real, hard-won wisdom was ever dismissed by somebody who trusted a formula over you, get down in the comments and tell me what you knew that they could not see. Somebody scrolling tonight is about to let a young person with a spreadsheet convince them that 30 years of knowing counts for nothing, and they need to see a whole room of us who waited and were right. And if this one reached you, you already know how to find the next. Go on and trust what you know. The numbers always catch up eventually. Ours always do.